Dead by Daylight started out as a small game with a limited roster when it originally released, and it wasn't until the release of the infamous, or famous depending on how you see it, Halloween chapter, adding Michael Myers to the game that it really began to enter the public eye. This paved the way for more licenses to join the game throughout its lifespan, totaling up to 23 licenses in the game as of recording. Now, whether every license was successful or not is largely up for debate and a massively opinionated topic. A massive factor that plays into their success beyond balancing is how faithful they are to their source material. Game balancing is a messy subject in this game, especially in its current state, and it's something I'm not even going to try to talk about here. Instead, this video is going to focus more on analyzing the license killers and how accurately they're portrayed in their gameplay. We're going to be here for a little bit, so let's hop in. Starting us off here is our very first licensed killer, Michael Myers. Myers has the ability to stalk survivors to grow stronger over the course of the game, starting out as a really weak killer at the start, tearing up to become a slightly better version than a normal M1 killer, to temporarily gaining the ability to insta-down survivors at his strongest tier. The farther you are from survivors, the faster your stock will increase, meaning you can tier up faster. The power itself is pretty easy to play against, but again, that's not what we're focusing on in this video. Despite being an outdated design, a massive part of why Myers is still on the higher end of pick rates despite being pretty weak is because in terms of aesthetic and faithfulness to Halloween, the power is pretty much spot on to what you'd expect from Myers. It's been said to death at this point. He does a lot of stalking in his home movie, not really doing much beyond stare at Laurie from a distance, only really attacking in the stages leading up to the climax of the film. It's on brand for Myers and it fits him quite well. And one particular set of add-ons, the Tombstones, also fit him quite well thematically despite being very annoying to face in game. Myers would absolutely disrespect the trial rules and kill whenever he felt like it rather than follow the meat hook routine if the entity let him. Overall, I'd say Myers had a very good translation to DVD, even if he is a bit outdated nowadays. He did release in 2016 and hasn't had many changes after all. Leatherface is a pretty quick one. His whole thing in Texas Chainsaw Massacre is that he's a chainsaw-wielding cannibal who wears people's skin as a mask. In DBD, he's a chainsaw-wielding cannibal who wears people's skin as a mask. Unfortunately, thanks to Hillbilly's existence, making Leatherface stand out in comparison was going to be a challenge, but in terms of translating him over, they did an alright job. Bubba's main problem on release was that he was rushed and barely had a power and functioning add-ons because of Nightmare on Elm Street. The very next chapter a month later was on the way as well. In terms of what Bubba does, he has a chainsaw that lets him insta-down multiple survivors at once, and if he hits the terrain, he begins swinging randomly while being reduced to a crawl. So, I guess in this regard they translated Bubba pretty well from TCM. The one thing he also had on release was that he had the ability to obtain headpiece cosmetics that showed him having turned the starter survivors into masks, which was a really cool detail. If it wasn't for people abusing the Claudette 1 to cause harassment. Thanks to that small minority of people, they all got removed from the game, and this is why we can't have nice things. Freddy has been all over the place since he dropped. He started out very weak but accurate to the films, then strong but unfaithful, then weak and unfaithful, and now he's in this weird middle ground where he's pretty decent and somewhat faithful in the sense to the dream world actually being a threat when survivors are in it. His kit involves him throwing snares to slow survivors in the dream world, creating fake explosive pallets to damage survivors in the dream world, teleporting to any generator on command, and teleporting to survivors trying to heal in the dream world. He's able to use the snares and the pallets to speed up dream world transitions, but survivors are able to counteract all these effects by primarily having an awake survivor wake them up manually or using an alarm clock on the map themselves to wake up and get temporary sleep immunity. I would imagine the dream world and making the godlike entity that rules it, that is Freddy, was, no pun intended, a nightmare to design and work with, given that Freddy can do a ton of shit in his home series. In the confines of the game though, I feel like Freddy was represented fine, but could use some improvement to media accuracy since Freddy's a lot more limited to fit gameplay and balance reasons when compared to the movies. It also doesn't help that this is remake Freddy instead of the original one, which was another contributor as to why this chapter wasn't received super well over the years. Pig is the Saw rep of the game, and this is one I feel was pretty straightforward to port over, as the reverse bear traps was Amanda's trial, and this is also just one of the most iconic traps in the series, so making them equipable on downs to force survivors to tend to them to avoid dying is basically spot on. Amanda in general was probably one of the better picks for killers in this game, so while the ambush feature seems a little extra so she wasn't completely powerless beyond the traps, The reverse bear traps, aside from some cheesing issues over the years, were brought over to DVD quite well, I would say. Ghostface is a unique case where he's a hybrid of both a licensed and original character at the same time. The reason we don't have Sidney, Billy, or Stu in this game is because Behavior has the rights for the Ghostface mask rather than Scream itself, meaning they had to make their own Ghostface for the game. And here's the thing, every single Ghostface that has appeared in movies or media, it's almost always a different person behind the mask. So, in a meta sort of way, Ghostface being the hybrid killer is perfectly on brand, it's not even funny. He, like Myers, is also among the higher pick rates despite his power being awful, because being able to crouch, stalk, lean, and just be sneaky and jump scare survivors is just what Ghostface does. Hell, if Behavior did acquire Scream itself, this is probably what Billy and Stu would be doing. Overall, despite not having the movie itself to represent, Ghostface represents their home series extremely well, and even though he's in dire need of some buffs for gameplay purposes, his power thematically is perfect. Demogorgon is a sci-fi horror creature from another dimension, the Upside Down, and it can create its own portals to return to and from the right side up, as evident in Season 1 of Stranger Things. This makes the portal part of the power just about identical to how you'd expect it to function, outside of survivors being able to seal it with their bare hands as opposed to needing Eleven's powers to do so. As for Shred, this is just the thing Demo can naturally do, it's just how it hunts stuff. Overall, pretty short explanation. Demogorgon was brought over pretty decently, all things considered. It just needs a little something to help it keep up since the newer killers are starting to outperform it, but that's a topic for another day once I decide to start covering this game again. Pyramid Head is an interesting case where, correct me if I'm wrong, but his power had to be made up on the spot. In his home game, Pyramid Head is just a big towering enemy who swings a giant knife around. I don't recall him being able to shoot pillars from the ground, leave barbed wire on the floor, and cage people when I was playing the Silent Hill 2 remake back when it came out. My Silent Hill knowledge in general is pretty limited, but despite this, I'm pretty confident in saying Pyramid Head isn't faithful to the game since he not only has abilities he does not have in his home series, he also theoretically shouldn't even exist unless James Sunderland is in the trial, and even then he should only be viewable to James himself rather than everyone. So yeah, as stated before, I'm confident in saying Pyramid Head was massively changed in DBD in order to function in the game and not be a standard M1 killer. Nemesis is the quintessential unfaithful killer most people point fingers to when discussing this topic, as one of the most defining aspects of Nemesis is that he's a zombie with the ability to use weapons, the most notable ones being a flamethrower and a rocket launcher. While the tentacle, or I guess the Any-Alpha parasite if we want to be technical, does get used in RE3 as well, it's not nearly to the same degree or as killer defining as it is in DBD. Nemesis also mutates in his home game, but it's more so his entire appearance and biology changing rather than just part of his arm getting stronger so the tentacle does more things. Overall, Nemesis in the confines of DBD I'd say is fine enough as a flamethrower or the ability to fire rocket launcher rounds at survivors, while admittedly being a pretty funny idea. It would definitely not work for a game like this, but it unfortunately hurts Nemesis' identity in this game a lot. His ability to use weapons is a massive part of what makes Nemesis so appealing to many. Pinhead, despite not being available anymore, was brought over incredibly well to DBD despite the controversy of his chapter. His power in being able to shoot chains himself while also having the limit configuration spam them as well is on brand for how Cenobite would function, given how they frequently use chains to restrict the movements of anyone they hunt. The box itself also giving Pinhead the ability to teleport to whoever's solving it is also quite a solid nod to the fact that Pinhead, Chowder, and the other Cenobites get summoned to whoever solves them and takes them away to the labyrinth. The only real thing you could get him on here is the lack of accurate voice actor early on in his lifespan, but this was remedied pretty quickly once Doug Bradley found out. Overall, outside of Myers and Ghostface, I would say Pinhead is one of the best adaptations to Dead by Daylight, being a very good showing for the character despite not really being known for being a slasher. Speaking of not being a slasher, Sadako is a very weird one to judge in DBD. Sadako traditionally is an overarching narrative antagonist for any cursed characters in Ringu, only appearing when it's time for that character to die, and she never lays a finger on anyone, instead opting to use her powers and her famous stare to heart attack people to death. This and the fact that her 7 days tape thing, obviously not computing with DBD's fast-paced nature, means translating Sadako over was a tall order, and for what we were given, she actually turned out pretty decently. That said, the 7 days translation was never going to be accurate to the source material just by design. Also, in her current iteration, the tapes being the thing to stop her condemn is confusing since that's what causes the curse to begin with in the book and film adaptations. The only way you could remove her curse from the source material was to make a copy of the tape you watched and show the tape to someone else, so simply just taking a tape to another TV doesn't make sense when considering her counterplay in universe. Overall, for what we were given, Sadako I feel was one of the better ones in terms of accuracy, but she's still flawed in execution thanks to just how unique Sadako operates. Albert Wesker is a superhuman with the power of Ouroboros at his fingertips thanks to being taken as he was injecting himself with it in RE5. Thus, Ouroboros actually being a harmful effect if not treated lines up with how it only benefits those strong enough to handle in the games. Wesker is also unnaturally fast and has excellent reflexes even before injection, which is what I feel like his bound and map traversal dashes are supposed to represent. Overall, pretty short summary. Wesker was translated alright, but hey, it was better than Nemesis' translation, I'll say that for sure. Xenomorph. Oh boy. This is probably the one that's going to get talked about a bunch in the comments, I can just feel it. This is another killer that gets clowned on a lot for not feeling accurate to the source material. However, keep these things in mind. The Xenomorph uses its tail as a weapon in just about every single appearance it's in, its weakness, being fire, was brought over via the flame turrets, and it historically quickly travels whatever environment it's placed in via the uses of crawl spaces or vents, which was ported over with the control stations. Hell, it even brought over its nesting webbing by infecting all the hooks on the map if the game detects it as the killer. By all accounts, Xeno was translated pretty decently within DBD's limitations, but what a lot of people complain about regarding Xenomorph is the lack of facehuggers outside of an Easter egg on Nostromo and its inability to climb walls. While the lack of these do admittedly hurt Xeno a little bit, these two would not at all fit without causing problems. Starting with the facehugger, since this is the easier one to explain, it would quite literally be a copy-paste of Pig's traps, and I don't mean in the sense in the case where Dracula has worse Pyramid Head, worse Spirit, and better Wesker in one power. I mean it would literally just be a one-for-one identical copy-paste of the bear traps and make there basically no reason to ever play Pig over Xenomorph, since the tail is so much better than the ambush. The other thing, the wall climbing, while it would be an awesome power to see, I absolutely agree with that, no way around it, it would make Xenomorph by far the most map-reliant and buggiest killer in the entire game. Just about every single map in this game would need to be reworked to fit with a wall crawling power, and the collision being notoriously terrible in this game means this would be extremely clunky and unresponsive if it also wasn't reworked. This plus taking into account that this game isn't like Predator vs. Alien, where Xenomorphs are quite literally a core part of the gameplay, and instead Xenomorph is simply just one of the 40 killer choices in this game. Xenomorph was translated over pretty well when taking into account what behavior was able to do within the confines of the game. Also, this killer's the reason we have Springtrap now, so clearly it was good enough for Scott to be comfortable with behavior handling FNAF. Chucky's a pretty quick one to discuss. He's simply a tiny plastic doll with a knife. The power lines up to someone with that description, and he can use the partial stealth to get in close since hidey ho mode makes him quite a bit stealthier, only being given away if he's too close thanks to being a giggler. The only real thing you could get Chucky on is him being able to interact and pick up things using his own spirit, but to be fair, it would literally be impossible for Chucky to pick up anyone otherwise, so I'm willing to excuse it here. Overall, pretty accurate killer, and very funny too since he also retains his shit talking and his voice actor. Vecna is very obviously not accurate to his source material in the slightest, largely because, unlike here, he is an all-powerful arch-lich in the source material who has actually managed to ascend to godhood on different occasions. That said, Vecna is saved from not being well represented thanks to one little detail: the Mark of Negation. This is essentially DBD acknowledging the fact that Vecna would be nurse tier levels of overpowered if left as is, so this acts as an in-universe reason to why Vecna is so much weaker in this game than he is in his source material. As for his powers, the eye and hand of Vecna D20 items are accurate in the fact that you have to gouge out and remove your own eye and hand to attune them to yourself for their effects, and Vecna's spells are all spells he can use in his source material, but toned down, again, thanks to the Mark of Negation affecting him. The closest you can get him on is Dispelling Sphere, but as I brought up in my Vecna analysis video, it's likely just a mix of Dispel and Detect Magic, both spells he can use. Overall, Vecna is obviously not tooth faithful thanks to his power difference between DBD and D&D, But the Mark of Negation acknowledging this detail is enough for me to excuse it and judge his general kit instead, and in this aspect, he just translated over pretty well. Dracula, on the contrary to Vecna, is extremely accurate to his source material. He's an extremely powerful vampire who can turn into a bat and a wolf, as well as have the ability to shoot fire at people. His castle even follows him around the realm to reference that Dracula is able to take his own home around thanks to the castle having the ability to teleport. The only exception to this is on Licensed Map outside Forgotten Ruins, because the only thing stronger than Dracula and the entity is the power of copyright. Overall, Dracula is just about spot on in representation from what I've seen, from his mannerisms to his powers to even having his true form available as a skin, albeit from a rift rather than having it on launch. Ken Kaneki, John Ghoul himself, is unfortunately not faithful to the anime or manga of Tokyo Ghoul outside of design and the fact that they did a really good job translating his 2D appearance into a 3D model. Kaneki, by nature, is passive and dislikes doing ghoul stuff, and even after he's forced to come to terms with it upon breaking free of Jason, he still remains generally a nice guy unless he's provoked. In DBD, they basically made an alternate universe version of him where he fully gives in to being a ghoul and is essentially a crazed animal in the realm, not matching his behavior in either anime or manga at all. Also, when studying his Kagane in the fight with Jason, his only real fight with his Kagane as a ghoul before he gets taken to the realm, the Kagane seemed to be used for deflecting and slamming attacks rather than for piercing, and his quick movements were more from Kaneki himself rather than using the Kagane to propel and grapple him around. Thanks to the use of the Kagane in that fight, plus his behavioral traits not matching up with how Kaneki acts after that fight's over, I'm going to deem Kaneki as unfaithful to the series. That's not to say this version of him wouldn't be capable of using the Kagane like this, it's just for the sake of drawing comparisons and contrasting to how he behaves between DBD and the source material up until when he was taken, it just doesn't match up. Finally, our last licensed killer, Springtrap, is an interesting case where half the power is faithful and the other half is likely entity given. The door spawning around the map and leading to an office space that survivors can get jumpscared from is on brand for FNAF, while the camera system and the power management was brought over really well as well, apart from being able to see Springtrap through walls. As for the axe, this is the part of the power where it's questionable since William Afton's never been shown with a weapon on hand in the games, and the only times he has was been in the books or in fan-made content. As for his appearance and mannerisms, yeah, that's Afton alright. The only real issue you can get him on in this department is the lack of colored belly and the black button on his model, as well as the inaccurate corpse when compared to the game. However, I'm glad the corpse isn't accurate to the game, because this version looks infinitely better in just about every other way. It's the best Springtrap has ever looked in official media. Call me a glazer all you want, but outside of the axe, I do think this version of Springtrap is very accurate to the FNAF series. It also is just impressive behavior managed to get a reasonable power for him in general. Springtrap doesn't really do a whole lot in FNAF since he's mainly just a bunch of PNGs and walks around until he runs into you in the office, so I imagine trying to get him to work in modern day DVD power design was a challenge for sure. Making a licensed killer feel like they're accurate to their source material is something quite important to get right when designing them. It's a massive selling point to the chapters they belong to, and it contributes quite a bit to their play rate beyond just how good they are. Although granted, the latter and the killer's accessibility and ease of play also plays a role in the rates as well. As I mentioned in the rant video last week and in my community posts, this is going to be the last DBD video I'm going to be making for a little while thanks to the state of the game being horrible in my opinion at the moment. So going forward, DBD content frequency will be reduced as I start branching out into other games. Regardless, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and join the community Discord. Let me know in the comments which licensed killers you enjoy and why. With all this in mind, cheers!